who bombed the ship my father was on, probably went crazy. And then, through the internet, which is just wonderful for research, I was able to come up with a fellow researcher. There were no records. Almost all the records of this particular mission, except one from the ground, but the records on the part of the pilot were all lost in a plane crash in Australia just at the end of the war. But luckily, this researcher found a journal, and the journal had a reference to this bombing incident and named the pilot. His name was Dave Conley. I was able, through the search mechanisms, to find that he lived in Sun City, Arizona. So I thought I'd call him up. I tried for a long time to think of how to phrase the question, and then the number was out of order. And then I called the sort of manager's office there. It turned out he had died about 3 years before. But he did have a son, and I had to try and track the son down, and I couldn't. And then I hired a private detective who found the son in Florida. And I talked to him on the phone, and he sent me a box of material from his father. And he said his father never talked about this at all. And it was clear from all the material in the box that he was a true war hero. He flew many, many missions. And I guess I didn't think of him as somebody who kind of intentionally did this. The problem was apparently in the communication setup between the army on the ground and the base, which was at Port Moresby. That's where a signal that was supposed to be sent. There were these two ships in the area. They're friendly. Don't bomb them. Never got through. And the Japanese, I didn't particularly blame the Japanese either. So I think you're right on that score.
Just another question over there.
I would pretend I don't know you, but then my question would make no sense. When I first met you and my father met you, he was very excited because you were Barney Darnton's son. And he had, like his generation, grown up reading all of the war and the reporting of Barney Darnton. And I just wonder, when you started being a reporter, did you feel pressure? Were there people who wrote to you and said, "Oh my God, are you Barney Darnton's son?" And then did you feel pressure in writing the book that you were now disabusing them of some of their mythology?
Yeah, interesting question. I did feel pressure. I wasn't flooded with letters once my byline began appearing. There was one letter from a woman who had known my father, both her and her husband, many years ago, and had kept up with them from time they were all starting out in Michigan, and then had kept up with them on this kind of ladder of coming all the way, culminating in New York. And I got this letter that said, I recognize your name. Do you want to meet? So Nina and I went up to Dobbs Ferry one Sunday, and the door opened, and there was this grandmotherly-looking woman with white hair, and she just looked me up and down and said, "Oh, you are Barney Darnton's son." Those were her first words. She invited us in, and her husband, from whom she had been divorced many, many years ago, was there, and they celebrated the anniversary of their divorce every year by getting together. And so she began filling us with anecdotes and stories, and was a very valuable resource to my brother. Her name was Millie Blake. So that was a good experience. But nonetheless, I felt pressure. There were still people in the newsroom who remembered him or remembered about him. And I thought, yes, I always thought I could never measure up to this. But after the Pulitzer for the first time, I thought, well, maybe he didn't win one. Yeah, maybe I can.
All right, we have time for like one or two more. Okay, so
I can ask another.
No more.
Sure. We talked a lot about your father, and I just wanted to ask you, and we talked a lot about the myths. reading the book, and some of the most difficult parts to read are about your childhood when your mom was an alcoholic. And I wondered if, in researching the book, did you, and kind of going through all those memories, did you become, how did it affect your memory of her? Were you more forgiving? Were you more understanding? I was curious how it affected your perception of her, because we talked a lot about your father.
Well, no, I think I've been, in my own mind at least, I'm forgiving and understanding of her from the very beginning. And that didn't really change. I didn't discover that much new about her that I hadn't known before. So, no, that didn't change. There was only one episode that was very hard to write about, and that was the one that ended her stint as an alcoholic. It was a stint that went on for about 10 years. And there were some kind of harrowing moments in it when we used to drive together to pick my brother up at basketball practice or something, with a car veering over and all, on the wrong side of the road and that kind of thing. And my brother had to learn to cook so that he would cook dinners on nights when she stayed in the city. But she did stop. She stopped drinking through AA, and so there were, I'm not sure how many years that would be, from about 1956 to 68, so 12 good solid years in which, she was a reformed alcoholic. And I think that went a long way toward, keeping the relationship solid.
You've talked about this being your first book. What's next?
And that's the agent sitting next to us.
A planted question. I don't know. I don't know whether I'll revert to fiction or try nonfiction. I think nonfiction, I'm beginning to think, is interesting.
I had one more question. How long did it take to write this book with all the research that you did?
It's very hard to answer because it was spread over many years, but I would say at least 10 years. And I stopped at one point to do a book to postpone writing this one, to kind of interrupt it. So altogether, probably of writing itself, maybe 2 or 3 years of intensive writing, but maybe 10 years of research altogether.
I think there's one more question. Is that Ed?
How do you explain that you were a child who was running around loose in the woods and riding your bicycle all over and not studying and not being tutored or being what we would all, I would drop dead as a mother if I was at your beginning. And yet you turned out to be a writer, a successful person. I was amazed by that.
Well, yeah, I think if, our education was there. It was public school education for the most part. And then luckily at a certain point, my mother was out at a dinner party in Washington and ran into, I think it was Mike Mansfield. Remember Senator Mansfield? And they started talking, and she naturally bragged about her son, Bob. And he said, well, sounds like you've got a good son there. You should go to a private school and really learn something. So he went on scholarship to Andover, a place that I don't think now burns very warmly in his heart. But I think he got a hell of an education there. And then when he was a senior there, I went there as a freshman. So I think Andover, despite all the drawbacks, really helped us a lot. It gave us a leg up. I just want to say one little anecdote about Andover that I put in the book, because to me it illustrates how the world really works. I was invited back for a reunion, despite the fact that I was expelled in my senior year. I decided to go on the urging of a friend of mine, a Scientologist, it turned out, who said, if you fall off the fence, you must touch the fence. And I was always a sucker for a good metaphor. I went back to the reunion, and Andover said, they wrote me a letter, the dean, and said, if you come back, we will give you a diploma. So I thought, oh, all right. So I went back. This was the 25th reunion. We were all gathered in a kind of a cabin in what was called the sanctuary. The dean came in, he made a little speech, and then halfway through he said, but we did commit years ago an injustice against he used the word injustice, against a member of the class. We don't, I looked for the record, I can't find exactly what it was that he did, but we've invited him back, and here he is, and we were going to give him a diploma, but it turns out we'd have to convene a special meeting of the Board of Trustees. So we will give him a certificate of attendance. So I had to get up, and I accepted the certificate, which was framed and everything, and explained what I had done to them, which was I had gone to a nearby town, I had half of a beer and came back, and that was consumption of alcoholic beverages, et cetera, et cetera. So I sat down, and a guy I knew from the class, who I remembered as one of these kind of, if you read Holden Caulfield, he would be like Ackley, you know, with a towel, snap it in the shower and all this. He came over and said, oh, yeah, you were thrown. He said, I was thrown out, too. I said, I didn't know what happened. He said, well, remember my roommate was a man named Ned Evans. And I said, yes. He said, and I remembered Ned Evans, the name struck a chord because he was famous for being rich. His family lived in Greenwich, Connecticut. Father was said to have a lot of money. So I said, yes, what did you do? And he said, well, we were hacking around. That was the words that we used. And Ned found a condom in a drawer and blew it up as a balloon. We were outside playing with it, and the housemaster's little girl came out, so we gave it to her. And she ran into the thing, and we heard her mother scream, and we were like that, expelled. And I said, so you left? He said, no, I didn't have to leave. And I said, what happened? He said, well, I was walking across the campus, returning library books, preparing to depart. Along comes Ned, and he's whistling and happy. And I said, how could you do this? We've just been thrown. I said, no. My father called the headmaster and said, what building do you need most? And he said, we could use a new science hall. And I was aghast. I said, that can't be true. And this fellow pulled out a map of the campus 25 years later, and there it said Evans Science Hall. So.
I was wondering what was the hardest part of the process for you. You said you stopped and you wrote another book. Was it the research, reporting, getting enough, finding what you wanted, or was it the emotions, or trying to live up to the story?
I think it was trying to find a way into the story. I was able to describe kind of pretty much the details of his death, but I didn't quite know how to blend that with sort of my own childhood and kind of my own career. So I think it was that notion of, do you do it all chronologically? Are you going to have flashbacks? How, the structure of it was difficult. I think it was that, or maybe even the weight. So I decided instead to do a kind of satire of newspapers, and that was much easier.
Well, I know people are probably going to assign books and may have questions for John, so they can come on up. And since we can't do a building in John's name, but we can get his beautiful, wonderful book, which I encourage you all to do. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary memoir, and I couldn't have been more honored to have shared the space with you.
I have to point out, David has some books here, too.
It all goes to the same pot.
If you haven't read Lost City of Z, a bestseller, you should. It's really wonderful. Thank you all.